Well, thank you all for joining us and welcome to Marie Selby Botanical Gardens Historical Briefing, the Gardens of the Sarasota Region. I'm Marlo Turner, the Vice President for Institutional Advancement. I oversee fundraising and membership, so thank you all for your continued support of Selby Gardens. The last historical briefing was focused on Bertha Palmer's love of gardens, and it was so interesting that we asked John to expand his talk and include gardens of our Sarasota region. As you have questions today, will you use the chat function at the bottom of your screen? We can see your chat and we'll be adding those to John's presentation. He'll work them in as he sees them. We will have 3 breaks for questions and we'll do a call for chats at that time. If he didn't answer your question during the presentation, he'll pick it up during that pause time for a question. So again, thank you for being with us today. And please welcome John McCarthy, Selby Gardens Vice President for Regional History. Good morning, John, and thank you.
Good morning, Marlo, and thank you for co-hosting with me today. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I've had an enjoyable time assembling the program, had some help from a number of people, and really looking forward to sharing today. Before we get started, I just want to thank all the great folks at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. And I want a special thank you to our President and CEO, Jennifer Romanecki, who invited me to do this program. And I love it when she gives me a little challenge to dig a little deeper, so to speak, and a little broader. And so that's what we've done today as we're going to explore the gardens of the Sarasota region. So I think, Marlo, with that, we'll just go ahead and get started with the slides. And folks, I hope everyone enjoys the program. And as Marlo said, we're going to have opportunity for Q&A as we go along today. So either put your questions in the chat and I'll either answer them as I go along, or we'll answer them at our breaks. I do want to recognize that images that we're using in this program came from Florida Memory, which is hosted by Florida Department of Historic Resources, Newspaper Archive, University of Florida, and the Sarasota County Library and Historical Resources. Everyone was good about allowing me to use their images, which makes me smile. Today's program is segmented into 3 sections. First, we're going to talk about the early gardens. And by early, I mean starting in the 1880s. So real early history. We're going to talk in the second section about garden design and materials. And then in the 3rd section, we're going to explore what I call gardens as lifestyle. And, you know, a lot of people, when they think of Sarasota history, they think circus. They say, oh, the circus made Sarasota. And the circus did have a big impact. And they said, oh, Sarasota's arts and culture. But I think by the time we're at the end of the program today, you're going to agree with me that gardens and gardening and local beautification was the most enduring of all the attractions and something that has really shaped our history more than I think we give it credit for. So with that, I want to start again with this wonderful quote from Bertha Palmer. The most wonderful thing in the world is a garden. I've found my one talent, if I have any, at Sarasota Bay. It is to watch beautiful things grow and see them blossom as I plant them. And this is Florida, folks. The climate, the soil, the rainfall, all these things contribute to make it just an amazing place for gardens. So like I said, we're going to go back in time. We're going to start early in the 1880s, but we're going to start on Palm Avenue. First, though, I just want to say the native nature that all mankind have found here in Sarasota has been inspiring to them. You know, the Native Americans took advantage of the wonderful landscape to build their homes, and they had their little gardens. And here we have pioneers who had gardens. But this is an image of kind of Sarasota before people got here. This is up along the Indian Beach area. I know we've got a lot of folks that live up in that area. They might be fascinated to see this image. But up on Palm Avenue, between Palm and Gulfstream, just a little bit south of today's Main Street, lived a photographer named Felix Pinard. And this is the home of let's see, Helen and Felix Pinard. And on the left, you see it's a very primitive home, just a small shack along Sarasota's bayfront. But on the right, you'll see that Felix was careful to show his little garden. So it looks like this might be some pepper bushes or something around a little bush. And it's a black and white image. We'll never know exactly what they were growing, but I think it's interesting that they have some little trails and some little flowers along the edge. And you'll notice a fence to keep out the deer and the hogs and the cows from eating either your flowers or your vegetables. So this photograph is from approximately 1886. And so this would be like one of the oldest photographs of a garden in Sarasota. And what was happening in 1886 was that downtown Sarasota was essentially created overnight by a Scottish company called the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company. And they bought all this land and they sold it to people throughout the British Isles, sight unseen, to come to Sarasota. They built a dock, a hotel that you see on the right-hand side, and all these other buildings within about a year and a half period of time. And all that work was to attract people to buy real estate in Sarasota. So the hotel was called the DeSoto Hotel, kind of spinning off the name Sarasota. And I understand that back behind the hotel, and this grew over the years, was a garden where the guests could enjoy the great outdoors. And so this is a photograph, again, by Felix Pinard, of a couple of gentlemen out in the garden. You see the rustic bench made out of bent wood. You see a date palm growing in the background. You see geraniums in the pot at the one gentleman's feet. And then you see what looks like a raised plant bed there with other geraniums in it. So you came to Sarasota, you came by steamer from Tampa, you got off at the DeSoto Hotel, and there was a little garden to welcome you there. Now, this is the original plat of downtown Sarasota from 1886, and you can see the dock at the foot of Main Street. You can see a little hatched square where the hotel was. You can see Main Street and all the other fruit named streets. By the way, Strawberry in the middle is now what we know as Ringling Boulevard. That was originally Strawberry. And the yellow arrow is pointing to the first home with formal gardens, where gardens were deliberately made as a beautiful showplace. And this was a place called Palm Place, named after the street. And Palm Place was owned by Mary and J. Hamilton Gillespie, and they had come here from Scotland to help to build the town. And this is a colorized version of a tiny little woodcut image in the oldest brochure that exists for Sarasota, showing Palm Place, surrounded by a white picket fence. The building was designed by Alex Browning, who was one of the people who came from Scotland. He had studied as an architect, so he designed some of Sarasota's first buildings. And Palm Place was the town's showcase. Now, J. Hamilton Gillespie isn't famous for gardening, even though he had the first formal garden in Sarasota. He's famous for introducing golf to Florida right here in Sarasota in 1886. So if there's any golfers out there, you've got J. Hamilton Gillespie to thank for all the golfing here in Sarasota. This is J. Hamilton Gillespie's second house. He remarried a local woman, Blanche McDaniel, and this was his wedding gift to her, and it was called Roseburn. So the first house and estate was called Palm Place, and this is Roseburn. And if you look close on the right-hand side, you'll see that Roseburn had its own conservatory. It was made out of concrete block with a glass and metal roof. And look at all the gingerbread on the house. I mean, he was happy to be married, I guess, and really made this house fancy. And here's another view, a little fuzzy, but you kind of see the whole conservatory. So I think this is great that he had landscaping and gardening outside, and then a nice little place to landscape indoors. And for those of you that remember Bertha Palmer's love of gardens, you remember that she had a large conservatory on the back of the stone castle up in Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. And speaking of the Palmers, this is the Acacias Mansion. This was located up on North 41 at about 12th Street on the bay. And you see this, all the porches and the big columns. And this was up on a high kind of a high area along the bayfront, and there was also Indian shell mound there. And this is where Sarasota's first pioneer, William Whitaker, had lived. Actually, when they were building the acacias, they found the old remains of the Whitaker homestead. But at any rate, if you're looking at the article on the left-hand side from the old Sarasota Times, this is 1912. And they're describing how she named the home the acacias after the wild acacias that were growing in the area. And they described the heavy growth of hickory and oaks and palm trees that was the native nature that Laura Honore was to carve her gardens out of. And so Laura Honore was Bertha Palmer's aunt. She was married to Benjamin. You see also they talk about there's an Indian mound with the underbrush removed. So let's take a look. Here is a postcard image of the Indian mound, and a pergola has been built on top by Laura, the same way that Bertha Palmer built the pergola down at Osprey Point, at what's now our Spanish Point campus. You see these Spanish bayonets planted along the edge of the stairway. You see these gorgeous concrete flower pots at the foot of the staircase. They appear to have little baby Spanish bayonets in them. The pink flower to the left is oleander. And we think that the one to the right is oleander as well. And the colorist just made it a little more red on that one. At the top of the pergola, you can see a little sign and it says Lookout Mountain. And so let's turn around now and see the grounds of the acacias from the top of the Indian mound. And so now we're looking out at the acacias mansion. We see again the native palms, and then we see all these other ornamental plants that have been installed to make a wonderful garden up on Sarasota's North Bay. There is a wonderful watercolor image here painted by a young woman in Sarasota named Nellie Spears. And this shows the orange honeysuckle that used to grow on an arch just south of the south entrance to the mansion. And actually back in the 1980s, when I was involved in history then, the honeysuckle was still there on the arch. So it's kind of amazing to me to see this watercolor. And again, the wonderful concrete pots there on the stair steps. And you can see Nellie Spears' little autograph down there, her signature on this watercolor. So this is a home that was under construction at the same time that the Acacias was being built. This one was out on Bird Key. And this was built for Davy and Thomas Wooster, who came to this area, bought the island of Bird Key in 1906, and by 1911 had planned the construction of this home. Now, if you look at this home, you see a little bit of landscaping around the outside edge, but then there's a walk up from the boat dock, which is how we would have come onto the property by boat. We would have walked up this little walk, and you see all the little flowers that are planted there around the fountain. And so Davy Wooster planned to continue gardens all over this estate. Unfortunately, she passed away just about the time that the house was completed. Her husband, her widower, he lived there for a period of time. And then in the 1920s, John Ringling bought Bird Key as well as Longboat and most of Lido. And his sister, Ida Ringling North, lived here until 1959 when Arvida Corporation developed Bird Key as a subdivision. And the New Edsall Castle was the name that this house had. It was named for the ancestral home of Davy back in Scotland. And this was John Ringling's idea of the Winter White House. He was inviting President Warren G. Harding to come and stay here in the winter, and that's why St. Armand's Circle is called Harding Circle. So there's a little bit of history beyond the gardens, but the garden's the entry point for it. And then going up north on the bay further, this is the early gardens of Mabel and John Ringling. They had purchased the estate of Charles Thompson, and they began to do concrete curbing and little crushed oyster shell paths, just like Bertha Palmer was doing down at Osprey Point. Again, you see columns, you see nice concrete urns, and you see a lot of different flowering plants here. And in the next image, you'll actually see cottazon. So this is 10 years later. The gardens have become more formal. The Ringlings are investing more money and time in their Sarasota estate. You see the swimming pool with the little diving platform. You see the arbor vitae, the royal palms. lots of flowering plants. And so this garden is really maturing over time. And then to kind of move our way back down south, this is Immokalee, the home of Honore Palmer. And he chose that name Immokalee, which is supposedly Seminole Indian for my home. So this was his home. He and his wife, Grace, lived here, just a few miles from their mother, Bertha, down at Osprey. And this is where the Landings subdivision is today. And looking out on the front lawn, this is like pure native nature. You've got your live oak trees with the Spanish moss and the cabbage palms and some red cedars. And then elsewhere on the property, they had all sorts of gardens. And this was just an amazing site. And again, now it's the Landing subdivision, and some of the folks that live there today have views very similar to this. And then working our way just a little bit south, and someone who was actually a good friend of Honore Palmer, Sarah and Stanley Field moved here from Chicago, and they moved a little bit later. This was the 1920s, and created what we now all know as the Field Club. But originally, this was their home, and it was called Wealaka, which means laughing waters. And this is meant to have been a gift from Stanley to his wife, Sarah, and what a gift it was. If you're familiar with the Field Club, the home spans the saltwater lagoon. There's an arch where boats could go underneath into the protected lagoon, and just an amazing piece of property. Not a lot of photographs because this was a real private estate back in the day, but this is an aerial view that's kind of interesting because it shows the house spanning the lagoon. It shows all the coconut palms and all the other lush vegetation that was installed around the home. And then you see all the vegetation lining the entrance road all the way out to 41. So that's pretty neat. And this article off to the right-hand side talks about the construction of the home. And it also mentions that while the home's being built, that the Fields are staying at Immokalee with Grace and Honore Palmer. So they were all part of that Chicago colony. And speaking of the Chicago colony, another family that was a part of that was Nettie and Edson Keith, who settled just south of Philippi Creek in what we now call Philippi Estate Park, or the Edson Keith Mansion. And here's the mansion when it was brand new. Notice how when you look north along Philippi Creek, you don't see anything but woods. They were way down south, and had a beautiful 68-acre parcel there. And they did, over time, develop ornamental gardens, but they had a higher priority, and that was vegetable gardens. And you can see their vegetable garden all tilled up on the right-hand side, ready for, cultivating. And they had a team of people. They grew a lot of the food that they ate on the property. And but they did also have ornamental gardens, as did all the larger homes like this. And then down to Osprey Point, the home of Bertha Palmer, the most extensive gardens of all. And, I think most of you've seen this image in my prior program from the front porch of her home, the Oaks, looking out at the wonderful live oak trees, some of which are still there today, and then out towards Sarasota Bay. But I wanted to share with you two new photographs that I've just obtained. This one, which is on the grounds of the Potter Palmer home near Sarasota, of course, in Osprey. And we've located this. This is actually at the Guptill House. You can kind of see the big mound sloping down from the right. And off on the left-hand side would be where the boatyard is today, but it did not exist at that time. And you can see that, again, we have the crushed oyster shell trails, and they're edged with brick laid down at an angle. It makes a nice little pattern around the walkway. And then, we've got these century plants, as I call them, the big agaves. They're amazing. Every 100 years or so, they send up a bloom, and that's why they're called century plants. And then we've got other flowering plants in here that are very difficult to identify, given the colorized image. But I just love finding new photographs of a place where, that we manage, and it just adds to our understanding of how the gardens were laid out. And then this is another new image to me. This is one of Mirror Lake. Again, Bertha Palmer's gardens at the Osprey Point Estate, and the little gazebo there at Mirror Lake, which was replicated to be our welcome center at the historic Spanish Point campus. And again, you see a profusion of vines, flowering vines and other flowering plants to enhance the backdrop of the cabbage palms and the oaks of the nature. And so again, Bertha Palmer, as well as all these other folks, were really carving out these wonderful little ornamental gardens amidst the beautiful nature as well. And then I wanted to mention a garden that was right here on our downtown Sarasota campus, because it was nestled in between the Selby house and the Payne house. And the house had originally been built by a gentleman by the name of Pierce, who was a planter in the British Honduras and who also came to Sarasota to be a vegetable farmer. But he sold the property to a woman named Ida Smith Hemingway, and she had extensive gardens here. This is an article about having a little bridge party, but late in the afternoon, delicious refreshments were served and the guests lingered in the gardens, declaring that they had spent a delightful afternoon. So this property that is now the Marie Selby Botanical Gardens downtown Sarasota campus has had a number of garden-loving people living here over the years. And I wanted to include this article too, because this is about a garden up in Bradenton near the Manatee River, and it talks about the most luxuriant growth of every known flower indigenous to Florida soil. It talks about the red poinsettias and the white poinsettias and the delicate peach blow hibiscus and the double red hibiscus and the roses. And so we don't have any photograph of this garden, but I think that the words tell a story as well about how significant gardens were to the early residents of the area. And this really carried over into the resort lifestyle. So this is the old DeSoto Hotel, now renamed the Bellhaven Inn, with 100 more rooms added. And you can see trees have been planted all around. You can see the picket fence, which surrounds a much expanded garden. So virtually everyone that came to this resort was not only in this beautiful crescent of Sarasota Bay shoreline, but they also had a garden right there to enjoy right in front of the hotel. And this was typical of the early hotels. Here's the Bay Island Hotel out on Bay Island on your way to Siesta Key, and you can see the landscaping that was done here, again, to make, you know, a very tropical setting for the guests that were coming to enjoy Sarasota. And then down south a little bit, I loved this image of the Villa Nokomis. This was down on Shake It Creek and US 41, Tamiami Trail. It was built by Dr. Fred Albee. But look at all the photographs of the plantings inside. You know, palms and ferns, and really to bring the outdoors in. And it's very rare to find indoor photographs of these places. And so I think it's important to realize that at the same time everybody was doing gardening outdoors, people were bringing their gardens indoors as well. Now, this is an advertisement from 1921. So 100 years ago, people were kind of promoting indoor plants. And then a hotel in downtown Sarasota, the Miramar, built right on the location of Gillespie's original Palm Place garden. And this is the entrance to the Miramar, looking out at the bay. And you see the nice garden at the entrance where it was just immediately welcome you into an amazing courtyard. So this is the Miramar Hotel, and then the apartments would be to our left. And in between was the courtyard that you see with some queen palms and ixoras. And I see some plumbago down there toward the steps and all sorts of ornamental plants. So if you were one of the guests at this hotel, you had your room, but you also had this beautiful garden that you could enjoy. And they had benches there, and they had all type of activities that would take place as well. So this was really how people were welcome to Sarasota. And just as I was putting the finishing touches on this program, I remembered one of the most amazing gardens I ever visited was at the Bickle House, the home of Madeira and Carl Bickle, that was directly adjacent to the old El Vernona Hotel or the John Ringling Hotel, however you know it. And so the home shows up here in the lower left-hand corner, and you can see the honeysuckle vines growing all over it, just a profusion of vines. And this is a postcard view from the 1930s, but here's a photograph, a couple of photographs from the 1920s. On the right-hand side, you have Owen Burns, all dressed in white. He was a major developer in Sarasota, had built the El Vernona Hotel, also had built this building actually as his Burns real estate office, and helping to sell real estate with John Ringling out on St. Armands. But he sold the home to the Bickles, or he sold his office building to the Bickles, and it became their home. And then next to him in the suit and tie is Dwight James Baum, who was the architect who designed Sarasota County Courthouse, Catazan, as well as El Bernona and the Bickles House. So, but here's Madeira Bickles sitting on a bench on the left in front of the house. And what was great about this is that her and her husband had traveled the world, and they had collected mosaics of ceramic and glass. And so their entire backyard was surrounded by a stone wall, a concrete block wall, and they had laid all these mosaics into it. And so back in the 1980s, I had an opportunity to photograph that. I don't have the photographs with me today, but I can tell you it was an amazing garden right downtown. So I think with that, oh, and this little cozy walk, this is a little image up at a hotel called the Palms up in Indian Beach. And that was just south of where Martin Luther King Parkway comes and meets Indian Beach Road. So I think with that, Marlo, I'm going to stop my screen share and we're going to field a few questions if we have any.
We do have a question, and we have somebody wondering, since a number of the sites you mentioned are no longer in existence, are there any that are still available to view the gardens, or do you have any suggestions on how to view historic gardens in our area?
You know, of course, the best gardens in the world are right here at the downtown Sarasota campus and historic Spanish Point campus. But, you know, of course, the Ringling Museum is still there. But of all these that I've showcased, none of that remains. So this is real history. But I think that people shouldn't forget about it. You know, those beautiful gardens at the acacias. I mean, back in the 1980s, everyone in Sarasota, the entire preservation community wanted to save the acacias. And unfortunately, that wasn't possible. But many other buildings people have gotten excited about, but now nobody even knows about the acacias, which to me is really sad because it was such an important building and an important place and an important family in our history. But we're just super fortunate that that we have what we have in the historic Spanish Point campus because of the legacy of the Palmer family, and then the downtown campus because of the legacy of Marie Selby. So we're very fortunate.
Perfect. The next question totally ties into that. One of the questions.
So someone's asked a question, what are the best resources to look through old photos of Sarasota? You can just Google Sarasota history and hit images, and you'll be looking at all sorts of photos. You can go to a place called Florida Memory, which is the state's archive, and you can do searches there, or you can just browse. Those are kind of two good places you can go. And you know, I've been collecting Sarasota history for 42 years now. So I have a lot of photographs in my own collection that I use too.
What about Bertha Palmer's ranchettes? Are any of those properties still intact?
I'm not sure exactly what that question means, but people who live in what we now, the Bee Ridge community, there are many people that are living on the old little small grove sites that Bertha Palmer developed for the Sarasota Venice Company and the Palmer Florida Company. And so there are probably quite a few little citrus trees in people's yards that started with that. Here's a question also about, they had fruit trees at historic Spanish Point or any of that nearby. Well, now the fruit's kind of gone wild. We've got the wild oranges, the wild key limes. And so it's kind of remnant, but the lychees was the big push for Gordon Palmer back in the 1950s, and none of the lychee trees did that well in the soil there. So if we were to have anything, it would have been the lychees, but for whatever reason, they didn't do well. And someone also wanted to mention that you can see some remnants of the plants that were at the Villa Nokomis at Pocono Trail Preserve, which is down in Nokomis. That's a site owned by Sarasota County. So thank you for that comment. And where was the garden located in Bradenton? I don't know the specific address, but it was located someplace along the Manatee River, probably not too far from downtown. That article was from about 1911. And so, things hadn't grown up and out so much at that point in time. But I think, Marlo, we should go back and take a look at the next section because we want to keep moving. And so this next section is entitled Garden Design and Materials. And so let's talk about that. So one of the things that made this region unique was that starting in 1883, there was a tropical plant nursery located in Onico, run by a gentleman named Pliny Reasoner and his brother as well. And they were collecting plants from all over the world and selling them mail order all over the world. But if you were in Sarasota or Bradenton or the nearby area, you didn't have to mail order. You could just go get what you needed. And so most of these early gardens that we've been talking about, this is where they got their materials. And I just love these old catalogs. These are University of Florida. So look at this, Tillandsias and succulents. It's got some nice little woodcut etchings, even some photogravures as they're called. And then they've got everything from agave to aloe to euphorbias and all these other types of plants. But let's look at some other pages in the catalog. Here's the miscellaneous department, and this is multiple pages, goes from A to Z. And just on these pages, we've got acacias, and we've got alamandas, and we've got amaryllis, and we've got aralias and azaleas. And so if you wanted it, and you notice they give you all these little descriptions and how much they cost and what size the pots were and everything else. So I just think this is amazing. And then here's cacti that were available and nice little images, and even saw palmetto and cabbage palm. They would sell you the native stuff too. So that's amazing on the left-hand side. And then the orchids, my gosh, the orchids. And so, you know, given that we're a botanical garden with a specialty in air plants and orchids, I just thought this was great. And some of the images here. And so again, that made Sarasota different when it came to plant material. And this is a photograph of the palms that the Reasoner Nursery was selling. And this was acres and acres and acres of plantings up in Onico. They just kept expanding and expanding. It's truly an amazing story. And this particular catalog is from the 1920s. And of course, the imagery has changed. The style's different. Now it's Mediterranean revival, just like the architecture. And folks, if you don't understand why they went to the Mediterranean revival style of architecture, it was to make Florida seem like it had been here forever. All these buildings were brand new in the 1920s, but they looked like they've been here for hundreds of years, and that gave people a sense of confidence. But what had changed for the Reasoner's Royal Palm Nurseries was that now they were offering landscape design services. And in fact, one of the first gardens that they designed was that one for Ida Smith Hemingway, which is approximately where the downtown campus big conservatory is now. So she actually had Reasoner Brothers do her landscape design right here at downtown Sarasota campus. I'm sure many plants were purchased from Reasoner Brothers by the Selbys, and we know that they were for Bertha Palmer. So, and these are some other advertisements. Here's one for the Royal Palm Nurseries. I think it's great. It says, make your home and town attractive. And that's what gardens do. And that's what gardens have been doing throughout Sarasota's history. It's not just a town with sandy streets and wooden boardwalks. No, in the 1880s, it's a town with a hotel and a little garden. And then as the people come and they build their houses, they have more gardens. And then look on the right-hand side, Keith and Kay, they're the creator of Gardens Beautiful, professional horticulture and landscape architects. You'll notice that they're specializing in Old English, French, Italian, Grecian, and wild gardens. And you'll notice that they're also licensed real estate brokers. So this was the coming together of gardening and real estate. And here are some yellow pages out of the old directories. And you can see for landscape architects, Prentice French. Prentice French had actually worked with John Nolan in doing all the landscape architecture for the city of Venice in the 1920s. And then he moved to Sarasota. His wife was an architect, so they could do architecture and landscape architecture. And then Brady Prevat, never heard of him before, but obviously up in Bradenton there. And then here's an advertisement. This is from the 1940s of Webster's Nursery. This was down in Osprey, south of the Spanish Point campus. And then you can see also on the right-hand side, landscape gardeners. Now, all of a sudden, you know, by the 1930s and 40s, landscape gardening is a profession in Sarasota. And so these are some of the people that were advertising along those lines. And then the other thing I found fascinating was that the florist shop would sell plant materials. So here, the Blossom Shop on Main Street is selling seeds and plants, and Ma's Flowers is selling potted plants, garden plants, palms. And so, you know, everybody was kind of getting in on the action. And here's a photograph from the Palmer Nurseries down adjacent to what's now the historic Spanish Point campus. This was the initiative of Gordon Palmer, Bertha Palmer's grandson. And they were growing all sorts of things. And I couldn't decide which of the photographs of the little girl I wanted to use in the program. So I used both of them. But I think that, if this doesn't put a smile on your face, nothing will. And you'll notice in the ad for Palmer Nurseries that they've got landscaping, ornamental plants, garden pools, sprinkler systems, all kinds of things like that. So pretty neat. And then this is a copy of the newspaper. The News doesn't exist anymore, but it was kind of Sarasota's second newspaper, if you will. And they had a whole section every week on gardening. So you've got on the upper left-hand corner along the garden path, you've got the week's garden chores to remind you what you're supposed to be doing for the seasons of the year, And then it's got Indian Beach Garden Club sponsors a show at the Acacias. And so everybody was looking forward to that. And then look down below on the right-hand side, the president's heart doctor, Paul Dudley White, urges gardening as the best exercise. Well, that's good news. That's 1958. And then also on the right-hand side, you see an ad for Palmer Nurseries, and they got the Cape honeysuckle and the Belgian azaleas and all kinds of other good things that you could buy there. You got to love those prices. All right. And now, Marlo, we've come to another opportunity to see if we have any more questions. And if we don't, we'll move on back to the program. And so for the final part of the program today, I want to talk about something that I call gardens and lifestyle. And I think this begins to kind of bring things together because, as I said at the beginning, people talk about the circus and people talk about the arts and the beaches. But when we see these slides, we're going to see how gardens were used to promote Sarasota and the Bradenton area as a major real estate push. And it made so much sense because this was the lifestyle that you wanted to live here. Of course, they were marketing to people from the colder climates. And so you wanted to come to Florida, not to stay indoors, but to enjoy the outdoors and to have your garden and to be able to create that kind of like your own work of art. And anybody could do it. The soil was good, the weather was right, and again, it all kind of converged to create this gardening culture, if you will. So,
what about vegetables? You gave us a peek earlier. Somebody had really put in a nice vegetable garden. Anything that you want to comment around vegetables during this time or through the region?
Well, Marlo, that's a great question because the reality is that if I was doing a program on vegetable gardens, I could fill it with articles, because everybody was talking about the guavas that they had raised, the tomatoes that they just picked, the peppers that they picked, the sweet potatoes. And virtually everyone in Sarasota had some sort of a little kitchen garden, and in the early years you had to, because where else are you going to get fresh food to eat? You've got the fish in the bay, you've got deer in the woods, but you also have this opportunity to grow all sorts of vegetables, and again, on good soil, while be sandy, they would go into, the coastal hammock areas with all the palm trees and stuff and kind of clear that out. And there would be good organic soil in there that they could use for a couple of years before they really had to augment it. But vegetable gardens were super important, but they're not the focus of today. So today we're focused on kind of that ornamental, that happy garden, that beautiful garden that isn't essential to our survival. It's essential to our soul. It gives us that refreshment that we get from gardens. It gives us that nourishment that we need. We don't realize how much we need it, but then when we get out in it and everyone's smiling and enjoying it and having a good time, which is what you see when people come to events at both campuses, then you really see the power and the magic of gardens and why they were so important to our community. So Marlo, be careful. You give me an idea and I'll do a program on vegetable gardens in the future.
All right. Well, let's continue our conversation about the floral gardens of our region, and we're looking forward to the next section.
Yeah, so I kind of moved off of this slide too fast. I thought this was an unusual photograph. This is another new photograph for me, and this was part of an advertisement for McFarland Sheet Metal Works here in Sarasota. So this big urn or pot, whatever you want to call it, is made out of metal, not concrete. And so I just thought that was pretty interesting. So I would slip it in there. And so now we're going to get into or part of the program, Gardens as Lifestyle. And so, not everyone knows that Ponce de Leon discovered Florida, in the Easter season. And so it was the Feast of Flowers. And so Florida, the land of flowers, but that's what we are. And, Sarasota County, this is the cover of the first promotional brochure created by the Sarasota Chamber of Commerce in 1921, describing this as a land of opportunity and resources. By the way, the advertisement on the left-hand side is the Sarasota Venice Company, the Palmer Company. And of course, they're promoting the rare soil, the few acres that you need to be successful. And of course, they were pushing people towards small groves and vegetable gardens, as the person asked us about earlier in the questions. But one of the subdivisions that was kind of neat was called Ravelin Gardens. This was a part of Whitfield Estates. And at Ravelin Gardens, you'd have an architect and a landscape architect working together to create the design for your place. And many of these homes are still there. They only built like 7 or 8 homes there in the 1920s before the crash came. But they all had beautiful gardens, courtyards, and gardens around. And so this is one of the images that I found, and it talks about how important it was, that these gardens would rival the European palaces, which I think is great. And then there was the Garden of Allah. And this was along North Tamiami Trail over to Old Bradenton Road. Mecca Drive was kind of the main street. And again, the idea is that you're not living in a subdivision. You're not just living in a plat. You're living in a garden, and all the things that brings with it. And and then I wanted to just, kind of revisit a few of the postcard views that we had in the waiting room, because these postcards were deliberately created, deliberately mailed north, and people would see these things like this banyan tree and say, oh my gosh, I've got to come to Florida and see that, or the royal palms. I mean, how stately of a palm can you get? It's sculptural, it's beautiful. And can you imagine a grove of royal palms and walking amongst these trees with all the other flowering plants? And that's what these postcards were designed to do, is to get people to think about wanting to come to Florida and come to Sarasota. Here again, a little show place with little garden paths and a variety of, looks like maybe azaleas in this case, queen palms. And so it just looks so tropical. It makes me want to hop on a train and go south. I thought I would include one of these, the Royal Point Sienna. And for those of you that are thinking that looks like a highwayman painting, you are right. And someone asked me the other day, well, did we have a lot of those in Sarasota? And actually, we did. This was not unusual in the 1950s to plant this as a landscape plant. And you can see them along the coastal areas. You can see quite a few in Southgate. And this year, they have bloomed magnificently. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen them bloom the way they do this year. So whether you're in McClellan Park, there have been some great examples in McClellan Park. There's great examples in Harbor Acres, I think. There's great examples all around of these trees, and they're still blooming. They've been blooming for about 2 months now. So they're a cool one. And then, the bananas, this is like a tropical thing that Americans were fascinated by bananas when they first encountered them in 1876 at the Centennial celebration. And John Webb was growing bananas down in Osprey before Americans really knew what bananas were. It's kind of amazing, but it's very tropical. And then, they're calling this coral vine, again, just gorgeous gardens that were put into postcards and shared with people up north to convince them to come down here. And this one's kind of paired up with a Royal Point Sienna and a jacaranda tree. Started to see jacarandas come in the 50s and 60s as well. And then I wanted to showcase some subdivisions, some developments that went and co-opted the garden theme to, of course, sell real estate. And this one's called Florasota Gardens. And Florasota Gardens is right at the intersection of 41 and Bay Street. So if you're looking at this, the road on the lower left is US 41. It looks like it's 2 lanes at that point. And then this is Bay Street running where Bay Street doesn't even run anymore. The bridge in the background is Osprey Bridge. And if we could see further in the image, we'd see Orange Avenue and then, the Selby property out on the point. But this was like a self-contained neighborhood of apartments and commercial and gardens. So let's take another look. Here's one of the apartment buildings. Again, royal palms around the buildings, Reclinata palm on the right-hand side. Lots of different colorful, like crotons and ixoras and hibiscus and those sorts of things growing all around. And when I was younger, I used to ride my bicycle around this neighborhood. It was like a whole little separate place. Here's the little commercial center that was on the corner of 41 and Bay Street. This would be directly opposite from where the Publix is now on 41 there. But you see the old cars. This was 1948. This was a $1.5 million investment. And it had some subsidy from the Federal Housing Administration because they were trying to create homes for the returning GIs after World War II. So at any rate, this was kind of a cool place. And here's the little saltwater lagoon that comes in from Hudson Bayou. And so Sarasota Gardens Apartments was like living in a garden. And by the way, they also had a little motel. You could rent rooms here too, so that you could fall in love and then rent one of the apartments. Central Park is what they call it today. And then directly adjacent, right next door, this is the scene in actually Lukewood Park, not Lakewood, but Lukewood. He was an early resident. He owned this property and his family dedicated it to the city as a park. And so this actually, very close to Sarasota Gardens, this is pretty much where the new building is now in Lukewood Park. The city lift station is kind of right where this was. But this is a wonderful lagoon. You see the big fountain in the middle, all sorts of flowering plants around and the palm trees. And this was just another one of Sarasota's beauty spots that the community could enjoy. And so now let's flip back up north a little bit. Bayshore Gardens, of course, is a massive subdivision up in Bradenton, anchored by what then was called Manatee Junior College. And here you have luxurious living. All the different home styles were named after plants or flowers. So this is the camellia. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, kind of a retirement home, and you could buy it for $9,990. Pretty cool deal. And here's the gladiola version. So they've got some landscaping. They got a beautiful home, but I don't see any gladiolas. And the bird of paradise, a mid-century modern kind of edgy little design here in the 1950s. And again, you see the obligatory palms, the big split leaf philodendron, and they called this one the bird of paradise. So, you know, they're just trying to get you to buy that real estate. And on the Sarasota side, Sunshine Springs and Gardens. This is something most people don't even know about. It opened up in 1955. It closed in 1959. It was out on Proctor Road, out beyond what's now the Interstate 75. Today, this is Lakeview Park and Lakeview School. But back then, it was a 400-acre lake for water skiing. And all these little network of paths and canals that you see here were the gardens. So Sunshine Springs and Gardens was designed to sell real estate in what they called Lake Sarasota. So this is Lake Sarasota, which is now off of, Bee Ridge Road. Here's the water skiers. And they had all sorts of water ski shows, all different times of the day, of course, and you can see the people all sitting there watching the water skis. They had a water skiing elephant, the only one in the world. Of course, it had to be Sarasota to combine circus with gardens. And they had the swan boats. And the swan boats went through those canals and you take a little boat trip through the gardens. How cool is that? I added this image last night because I found it and I'd never seen it before. But look at the swan boat, look at all the nice little bridges, all the flowering plants. And of course, this was just a way to get you to fall in love with Florida, fall in love with Sarasota, fall in love with Lake Sarasota, and buy a home. But I know what you're thinking. You're looking at that boat and you're thinking, I wish I could get out in a boat like that and enjoy some gardens. And you know what? You can, because you can set sail with Selby Gardens. And you can take our boat trip from the downtown Sarasota campus down to the historic Spanish Point campus and back again, all in the same day. And in between is an aquatic garden surrounded by 3 types of mangroves and then underlaid by 3 types of seagrass. And between the seagrass and those mangroves, it gives nourishment to everything that's living in that bay, which gives nourishment to us. And that's what gardens are all about. So set sail with Selby. You can't go to Sunshine Springs and Gardens anymore, but we're filling that gap with setting sail with Selby. And of course, when you get to the historic Spanish Point campus, especially after seeing this program, and you have a chance to actually see in person 1912, Sunken Garden and Pergola, Bertha Palmer's favorite garden, although she had several favorites. And, come down and check it all out, because this is what it's all about, folks. Life is to be enjoyed. And the best way we can enjoy our lives is to put ourselves in a garden, to do some gardening. We've spent almost an hour talking about gardens in the past, but you know what? Marie Selby Botanical Gardens is about gardens for the future. And so this is our vision of the future, which is coming on mighty rapidly. And so we are a part of this garden tradition. We're kind of like the capstone of this garden tradition that started in Sarasota back in the 1880s and has grown and grown and grown because of people like Laura Honore, people like Bertha Palmer, people like Marie Selby. And this is the legacy of gardening that I'm sharing with you today, so that we can all appreciate more how special Sarasota is and how special these gardens are and how special Marie Selby Botanical Gardens are. So thanks to everyone for coming. We've got time for a couple of more questions, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
We had a nice comment from Carol on Longboat Key saying she took the set sail with Selby and had a great time with Ross and all of his knowledge, and wished that it had been taped so that she could go back and study and be able to share the knowledge that Ross has. If you do have questions, please go ahead and add those to the chat. We'll answer them. We have a few more minutes. And we have one person says, talk a little bit more about Marie. Marie has some interesting garden facts. You want to share any of those?
Well, she was one of the founders of the Sarasota Garden Club, and she was the host for many of their early meetings. I've been doing research, looking back through the old newspapers, and every couple of weeks she's hosting a meeting again. But she's giving lectures on hedges, lectures on roses, lectures on lawn care, and all these other things. So on the one hand, the Selby family were very not so much in the social scene, but when it came to the garden club, they were kind of the heart of the social scene. And that was all right here, on the downtown Sarasota campus. So I think that the other thing is that Marie Selby kind of bridged the gap. She was here 1909 for her honeymoon, 1921 built the house, start to develop the gardens, but she's still here post-World War II. She's one of the very few who were. And so she had seen all of this. She had seen a lot of what we've talked about today. She had seen all that unfold here in Sarasota. And I think that notion of how important the gardens were and her garden could be. And I don't know that she could have any way of seeing really what has become of her idea. But we know she would be proud, because it's not just her garden anymore. It's an entire campus, and now 2 campuses, and the research and the science and the number of people that get to enjoy it, I think, really, that's the legacy, that Marie Selby Botanical Gardens is really all about.
That's lovely. We have just a lot of comments. People are very grateful for your knowledge and have enjoyed it. We thank you all for joining us. John, that's been so informative. These briefings do help expand our mission of providing those bayfront sanctuaries, connecting people with native nature, air plants, and the world, and our regional history. They also are serving as a wonderful place of respite during this time. And I can oversee the gardens right now where I'm sitting, and there's lots of families out enjoying the downtown campus and taking advantage of the wonderful weather. If you're looking to enjoy a little art in the gardens, go to our historic Spanish Point campus and enjoy the augmented reality exhibition, Seeing the Invisible. And then at the downtown campus this week, we opened Flora Imaginaria, which is the flower and contemporary photography, featuring about 70 contemporary photography shots done by 50 different international artists, and they are vivid. They're in the gardens, they're in the Museum of Botany and Arts, and you will love them. Our next historical briefing will be boats, bays, and bayfront sanctuaries on September 14th at noon. So watch our website. You can find our classes, lectures, events, all at selby.org. And John, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thank all of you who tuned in, and everyone enjoy your day.